HERZOG by Saul Bellow. If I'm out of my mind, it's all right with me, thought Moses Herzog. Some people thought he was cracked, and for a time he himself had doubted that he was all there. But now, though he still behaved oddly, he felt confident, cheerful, clairvoyant, and strong. He had fallen under a spell and was writing letters to everyone under the sun. He was so stirred by these letters that from the end of June he moved from place to place with a valise full of papers. He had carried this valise from New York to Martha's Vineyard, but returned from the vineyard immediately. 2 days later he flew to Chicago, and from Chicago he went to a village in western Massachusetts. Hidden in the country, he wrote endlessly, fanatically, to the newspapers, to people in public life, to friends, to relatives, and at last to the dead, his own obscure dead, and finally the famous dead. It was the peak of summer in the Berkshires. Herzog was alone in the big old house. Normally particular about food, he now ate silver-cup bread from the paper package, beans from the can, and American cheese. Now and then he picked raspberries in the overgrown garden, lifting up the thorny canes with absent-minded caution. As for sleep, he slept on a mattress without sheets. It was his abandoned marriage bed, or in the hammock, covered by his coat. Tall bearded grass and locust and maple seedlings surrounded him in the yard. When he opened his eyes in the night, the stars were near like spiritual bodies. Fires, of course, gases, minerals, heat, atoms, but eloquent at 5 in the morning to a man lying in a hammock, wrapped in his overcoat. When some new thought gripped his heart, he went to the kitchen, his headquarters, to write it down. The white paint was scaling from the brick walls, and Herzog sometimes wiped mouse droppings from the table with his sleeve, calmly wondering why field mice should have such a passion for wax and paraffin. They made holes in the paraffin-sealed preserves. They gnawed birthday candles down to the wicks. A rat chewed into a package of bread, leaving the shape of its body in the layers of slices. Herzog ate the other half of the loaf spread with jam. He could share with rats, too. All the while, one corner of his mind remained open to the external world. He heard the crows in the morning. Their harsh call was delicious. He heard the thrushes at dusk. At night there was a barn owl. When he walked in the garden, excited by a mental letter, he saw roses winding about the rain spout, or mulberries, birds gorging in the mulberry tree. The days were hot, the evenings flushed and dusty. He looked keenly at everything, but he felt half blind. His friend, his former friend, Valentine, and his wife, his ex-wife, Madeline, had spread the rumor that his sanity had collapsed. Was it true? He was taking a turn around the empty house and saw the shadow of his face in a gray, webby window. He looked weirdly tranquil. A radiant line went from mid-forehead over his straight nose and full, silent lips. Late in spring, Herzog had been overcome by the need to explain, to have it out, to justify, to put in perspective, to clarify, to make amends. At that time, he had been giving adult education lectures in a New York night school. He was clear enough in April, but by the end of May he began to ramble. It became apparent to his students that they would never learn much about the roots of Romanticism, but that they would see and hear odd things. One after another, the academic formalities dropped away. Professor Herzog had the unconscious frankness of a man deeply preoccupied. And toward the end of the term, there were long pauses in his lectures. He would stop, muttering, "Excuse me," reaching inside his coat for his pen. The table creaking, he wrote on scraps of paper with a great pressure of eagerness in his hand. He was absorbed, his eyes darkly circled. His white face showed everything, everything. He was reasoning, arguing, he was suffering. He had thought of a brilliant alternative. He was wide open, he was narrow. His eyes, his mouth made everything silently clear. Longing, bigotry, bitter anger. One could see it all. The class waited 3 minutes, 5 minutes, utterly silent. At first, there was no pattern to the notes he made. They were fragments, nonsense, syllables, exclamations, twisted proverbs and quotations, or, in the Yiddish of his long-dead mother, Tripferter, retorts that came too late, when you were already on your way down the stairs. He wrote, for instance, death, die, live, again, die, again, live. No person, no death. And, on the knees of your soul, might as well be useful, scrub the floor. Next, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest thou be like unto him. Choose one. He noted also, I see by Walter Winchell that J.S. Bach put on black gloves to compose a Requiem Mass. Herzog scarcely knew what to think of this scrolling. He yielded to the excitement that inspired it, and suspected at times that it might be a symptom of disintegration. That did not frighten him. Lying on the sofa of the kitchenette apartment he had rented on 17th Street, he sometimes imagined he was an industry that manufactured personal history, and saw himself from birth to death. He conceded on a piece of paper, I cannot justify. Considering his entire life, he realized that he had mismanaged everything. Everything! His life was, as the phrase goes, ruined. But since it had not been much to begin with, there was not much to grieve about. Thinking on the malodorous sofa of the centuries, the 19th, the 16th, the 18th, he turned up, from the last, a saying that he liked. Grief, sir, is a species of idleness. He went on taking stock, lying face down on the sofa. Was he a clever man or an idiot? Well, he could not at this time claim to be clever. He might once have had the makings of a clever character, but he had chosen to be dreamy instead, and the Sharpies cleaned him out. What more? He was losing his hair. He read the ads of the Thomas Scalp Specialist with the exaggerated skepticism of a man whose craving to believe was deep, desperate. Scalp experts! So, he was a formally handsome man. His face revealed what a beating he had taken, but he had asked to be beaten too, and had lent his attackers strength. That brought him to consider his character. What sort of character was it? Well, in the modern vocabulary, it was narcissistic. It was masochistic. It was anachronistic. His clinical picture was depressive. Not the severest type. Not a manic depressive. There were worse cripples around. If you believed, as everyone nowadays apparently did, that man was the sick animal, then was he even spectacularly sick, exceptionally blind, extraordinarily degraded? No. Was he intelligent? His intellect would have been more effective if he had had an aggressive paranoid character eager for power. He was jealous, but not exceptionally competitive, not a true paranoiac. And what about his learning? He was obliged to admit now that he was not much of a professor either. Oh, he was earnest. He had a certain large, immature sincerity, but he might never succeed in becoming systematic. He had made a brilliant start in his PhD thesis, The State of Nature in 17th and 18th Century English and French Political Philosophy. He had to his credit also several articles and a book, Romanticism and Christianity. But the rest of his ambitious projects had dried up, one after another. On the strength of his early successes, he had never had difficulty in finding jobs and obtaining research grants. The Narragansett Corporation had paid him $15,000 over a number of years to continue his studies in Romanticism. The results lay in the closet in an old valise, 800 pages of chaotic argument which had never found its focus. It was painful to think of. On the floor beside him were pieces of paper, and he occasionally leaned down to write. He now set down, not that long disease, my life, but that long convalescence, my life. The liberal bourgeois revision, the illusion of improvement, the poison of hope. He thought a while of Mithridates, whose system learned to thrive on poison. He cheated his assassins, who made the mistake of using small doses, and was pickled, not destroyed. Tutto fabroto. Resuming his self-examination, he admitted that he had been a bad husband, twice. Daisy, his first wife, he had treated miserably. Madeline, his second, had tried to do him in. To his son and his daughter, he was a loving but bad father. To his own parents, he had been an ungrateful child. To his country, an indifferent citizen. To his brothers and sister, affectionate but remote. With his friends, an egotist. With love, lazy. With brightness, dull. With power, passive. With his own soul, evasive. Satisfied with his own severity, positively enjoying the hardness and factual rigor of his judgment, he lay on his sofa, his arms rising behind him, his legs extended without aim. But how charming we remain, notwithstanding. Papa, poor man, could charm birds from the trees, crocodiles from the mud. Madeleine, too, had great charm and beauty of person also, and a brilliant mind. Valentine Gerbach, her lover, was a charming man too, though in a heavier, brutal style. He had a thick chin, flaming copper hair that literally gushed from his head. No Thomas Scalp specialist for him, and he walked on a wooden leg gracefully, bending and straightening like a gondolier. Herzog himself had no small amount of charm, but his sexual powers had been damaged by Madeleine, and without the ability to attract women, how was he to recover? It was in this respect that he felt most like a convalescent. The paltriness of these sexual struggles. With Madeleine, several years ago, Herzog had made a fresh start in life. He had won her away from the church when they met. She had just been converted. With $20,000 inherited from his charming father, to please his new wife, he quit an academic position, which was perfectly respectable, and bought a big old house in Louisville, Massachusetts. In the peaceful Berkshires, where he had friends, the Valentine Gerbachs. It should be easy to write his second volume on the social ideas of the Romantics. Herzog did not leave academic life because he was doing badly. On the contrary, his reputation was good. His thesis had been influential and was translated into French and German. His early book, not much noticed when it was published, was now on many reading lists, and the younger generation of historians accepted it as a model of the new sort of history. History that interests us, personal, engagé, and looks at the past with an intense need for contemporary relevance. As long as Moses was married to Daisy, he had led the perfectly ordinary life of an assistant professor, respected and stable. His first work showed by objective research what Christianity was to Romanticism. In the second, he was becoming tougher, more assertive, more ambitious. There was a great deal of ruggedness, actually, in his character. He had a strong will and a talent for polemics, a taste for the philosophy of history. In marrying Madeleine, and resigning from the university because she thought he should, digging in at Louisville, he showed a taste and talent also for danger and extremism, for heterodoxy, for ordeals, a fatal attraction to the city of destruction. What he planned was a history which really took into account the revolutions and mass convolutions of the 20th century, accepting, with de Tocqueville, the universal and durable development of the equality of conditions, the progress of democracy. But he couldn't deceive himself about this work. He was beginning seriously to distrust it. His ambitions received a sharp check. Hegel was giving him a great deal of trouble. 10 years earlier, he had been certain he understood his ideas on consensus and civility, but something had gone wrong. He was distressed, impatient, angry. At the same time, he and his wife were behaving very peculiarly. She was dissatisfied. At first, she hadn't wanted him to be an ordinary professor, but she changed her mind after a year in the country. Madeleine considered herself too young, too intelligent, too vital, too sociable to be buried in the remote Berkshires. She decided to finish her graduate studies in Slavonic languages. Herzog wrote to Chicago about jobs. He had to find a position for Valentine Gersbach, too. Valentine was a radio announcer, a disc jockey in Pittsfield. You couldn't leave people like Valentine and Phoebe stuck in this mournful countryside alone, Madeleine said. Chicago was chosen because Herzog had grown up there and was well connected. So he taught courses in the downtown college, and Gersbach became educational director of an FM station in the Loop. The house near Louisville was closed up, $20,000 worth of house, with books and English bone china and new appliances abandoned to the spiders, the moles, and the field mice, Papa's hard-earned money. The Herzogs moved to the Midwest, but after about a year of this new Chicago life, Madeleine decided that she and Moses couldn't make it after all. She wanted a divorce. He had to give it. What could he do? And the divorce was painful. He was in love with Madeleine. He couldn't bear to leave his little daughter. But Madeleine refused to be married to him. And people's wishes have to be respected. Slavery is dead. The strain of the second divorce was too much for Herzog. He felt he was going to pieces, breaking up, and Dr. Edvig, the Chicago psychiatrist who treated both Herzogs, agreed that perhaps it was best for Moses to leave town. He came to an understanding with the dean of the downtown college that he might come back when he was feeling better, and on money borrowed from his brother Shura, he went to Europe. Not everyone threatened with a crack-up can manage to go to Europe for relief. Most people have to keep on working. They report daily. They still ride the subway. Or else they drink. They go to the movies and sit there suffering. Herzog ought to have been grateful. Unless you are utterly exploded, there is always something to be grateful for. In fact, he was grateful. He was not exactly idle in Europe either. He made a cultural tour for the Narragansett Corporation, lecturing in Copenhagen, Warsaw, Krakow, Berlin, Belgrade, Istanbul, and Jerusalem. But in March, when he came to Chicago, again his condition was worse than it had been in November. He told his dean that it would probably be better for him to stay in New York. He did not see Madeline during his visit. His behavior was so strange, and to her mind so menacing, that she warned him through Gersbach not to come near the house on Harper Avenue. The police had a picture of him and would arrest him if he was seen in the block. It was now becoming clear to Herzog himself, incapable of making plans, how well Madeline had prepared to get rid of him. 6 weeks before sending him away, she had had him lease a house near the Midway at $200 a month. When they moved in, he built shelves, cleared the garden, and repaired the garage door. He put up the storm windows. Only a week before she demanded a divorce. She had his things cleaned and pressed, but on the day he left the house, she flung them all into a carton, which she then dumped down the cellar stairs. She needed more closet space, and other things happened, sad, comical, or cruel, depending on one's point of view. Until the very last day, the tone of Herzog's relations with Madeline was quite serious. That is, ideas, personalities, issues were respected and discussed. When she broke the news to him, for instance, she expressed herself with dignity in that lovely, masterful style of hers. She had thought it over from every angle, she said, and she had to accept defeat. They could not make the grade together. She was prepared to shoulder some of the blame. Of course, Herzog was not entirely unprepared for this, but he had really thought matters were improving. All this happened on a bright, keen fall day. He had been in the backyard putting in the storm windows. The first frost had already caught the tomatoes. The grass was dense and soft, with a peculiar beauty it gains when the cold days come and the gossamers lie on it in the morning. The dew is thick and lasting. The tomato vines had blackened and the red globes had burst. He had seen Madeline at the back window upstairs putting June down for her nap, and later he heard the bath being run. Now she was calling from the kitchen door. A gust from the lake made the framed glass tremble in Herzog's arms. He propped it carefully against the porch and took off his canvas gloves, but not his beret, as though he sensed that he would immediately go on a trip. Madeline hated her father violently, but it was not irrelevant that the old man was a famous impresario, sometimes called the American Stanislavski. She had prepared the event with a certain theatrical genius of her own. She wore black stockings, high heels, a lavender dress with Indian brocade from Central America. She had on her opal earrings, her bracelets, and she was perfumed. Her hair was combed with a new clean part, and her large eyelids shone with a bluish cosmetic. Her eyes were blue, but the depth of the color was curiously affected by the variable tinge of the whites. Her nose, which descended in a straight, elegant line from her brows, worked silently, slightly, when she was peculiarly stirred. To Herzog, even this tick was precious. There was a flavor of subjugation in his love for Madeline. Since she was domineering, and since he loved her, he had to accept the flavor that was given. In this confrontation in the untidy parlor, two kinds of egotism were present, and Herzog from his sofa in New York now contemplated them, hers in triumph. She had prepared a great moment. She was about to do what she longed most to do, strike a blow. And his egotism, in abeyance, all converted into passivity. What he was about to suffer, he deserved. He had sinned long and hard. He had earned it. This was it. In the window, on glass shelves, there stood an ornamental collection of small glass bottles, Venetian and Swedish. They came with the house. The sun now caught them. They were pierced with the light. Herzog saw the waves, the threads of color, the spectral intersecting bars, and especially a great blot of flaming white on the center of the wall above Madeline. She was saying, "We can't live together any more." Her speech continued for several minutes. Her sentences were well formed. This speech had been rehearsed, and it seemed also he had been waiting for the performance to begin. Theirs was not a marriage that could last. Madeline had never loved him. She was telling him that. "It's painful to have to say I never loved you. I never will love you either," she said. "So there's no point in going on." Herzog said, "I do love you, Madeline." Step by step, Madeline rose in distinction, in brilliance, in insight. Her color grew very rich, and her brows and that Byzantine nose of hers moved. Her blue eyes gained by the flush that kept deepening, rising from her chest and her throat. She was in an ecstasy of consciousness. It occurred to Herzog that she had beaten him so badly, her pride was so fully satisfied, that there was an overflow of strength in her intelligence. He realized that he was witnessing one of the very greatest moments of her life. "You should hold on to that feeling," she said. "I believe it's true. You do love me. But I think you also understand what a humiliation it is to me to admit defeat in this marriage. I put all I had into it. I'm crushed by this." Crushed? She had never looked more glorious. There was an element of theater in those looks, but much more of passion. And Herzog, a solid figure of a man, if pale and suffering, lying on his sofa in the lengthening evening of a New York spring, in the background the trembling energy of the city, a sense and flavor of river water, a stripe of beautifying and dramatic filth contributed by New Jersey to the sunset. Herzog, in the coup of his privacy, and still strong in body, his health was really a sort of miracle. He had done his best to be sick, pictured what might have happened if, instead of listening so intensely and thoughtfully, he had hit Madeline in the face. What if he had knocked her down, clutched her hair, dragged her screaming and fighting around the room, flogged her until her buttocks bled? What if he had? He should have torn her clothes, ripped off her necklace, brought his fist down on her head. He rejected this mental violence, sighing. He was afraid he was really given in secret to this sort of brutality. But suppose even that he had told her to leave the house. After all, it was his house. If she couldn't live with him, why didn't she leave? The scandal? There was no need to be driven away by a little scandal. It would have been painful, grotesque, but a scandal was after all a sort of service to the community. Only it had never entered Herzog's mind in that parlor of flashing bottles to stand his ground. He still thought perhaps that he could win by the appeal of passivity, of personality, win on the ground of being, after all, Moses Elkanah Herzog, a good man, and Madeline's particular benefactor. He had done everything for her. Everything. "Have you discussed this decision with Dr. Edvig?" he said. "What does he think?" "What difference could his opinion make to me? He can't tell me what to do. He can only help me understand. I went to a lawyer," she said. "Which lawyer?" "Well, Sandor Himmelstein. Because he is a buddy of yours. He says you can stay with him until you make your new arrangements." The conversation was over, and Herzog returned to the storm windows in the shadow and green damp of the backyard to his obscure system of idiosyncrasies. A person of irregular tendencies, he practiced the art of circling among random facts to swoop down on the essentials. He often expected to take the essentials by surprise, by an amusing stratagem. But nothing of the sort happened as he maneuvered the rattling glass, standing among the frost-scorched, drooping tomato vines tied to their stakes with strips of rag. The plant scent was strong. He continued with the windows because he couldn't allow himself to feel crippled. He dreaded the depths of feeling low himself to feel crippled. He dreaded the depths of feeling low himself to feel crippled. He dreaded the depths of feeling he would eventually have to face when he could no longer call upon his eccentricities for relief. In his posture of collapse on the sofa, arms abandoned over his head and legs stretched away, lying with no more style than a chimpanzee, his eyes with greater than normal radiance watched his own work in the garden with detachment, as if he were looking through the front end of a telescope at a tiny clear image. That suffering joker. 2 points, therefore. He knew his scribbling, his letter-writing was ridiculous. It was involuntary. His eccentricities had him in their power. There is someone inside me. I am in his grip. When I speak of him, I feel him in my head, pounding for order. He will ruin me. It has been reported, he wrote, that several teams of Russian cosmonauts have been lost. Disintegrated, we must assume. One was heard calling SOS World. SOS. Soviet confirmation has been withheld. Dear Mama, as to why I haven't visited your grave in so long, dear Wanda, dear Zinka, dear Libby, dear Ramona, dear Sono, I need help in the worst way. I am afraid of falling apart. Dear Edvig, the fact is that madness also has been denied me. I don't know why I should write to you at all. Dear Mr. President, Internal Revenue regulations will turn us into a nation of bookkeepers. The life of every citizen is becoming a business. This, it seems to me, is one of the worst interpretations of the meaning of human life history has ever seen. Man's life is not a business. And how shall I sign this? Thought Moses. Indignant citizen? Indignation is so wearing that one should reserve it for the main injustice. Dear Daisy, he wrote to his first wife, I know it's my turn to visit Marco in camp on Parents' Day, but this year I'm afraid my presence might disturb him. I have been writing to him and keeping up with his activities. It is unfortunately true, however, that he blames me for the breakup with Madeline, and feels I have deserted also his little half-sister. He is too young to understand the difference between the 2 divorces. Here, Herzog asked himself whether it would be appropriate to discuss the matter further with Daisy, and, picturing to himself her handsome and angry face as she read his as yet unwritten letter, he decided against this. He continued, I think it would be best for Marco not to see me. I have been sick, under the doctor's care. He noted with distaste his own trick of appealing for sympathy. A personality had its own ways. A mind might observe them without approval. Herzog did not care for his own personality, and at the moment there was apparently nothing he could do about its impulses. Rebuilding my health and strength gradually. As a person of sound positive principles, modern and liberal, news of his progress, if true, should please her. As the victim of those impulses, she must be looking in the paper for his obituary. The strength of Herzog's constitution worked obstinately against his hypochondria. Early in June, when the general revival of life troubles many people, the new roses, even in shop windows, reminding them of their own failures of sterility and death, Herzog went to have a medical checkup. He paid a visit to an elderly refugee, Dr. Emmerich, on the west side, facing Central Park. A frowsy doorman with an odor of old age about him, wearing a cap from a Balkan campaign half a century gone, led him into the crumbling vault of the lobby. Herzog undressed in the examining room, a troubled dire green. The dark walls seemed swollen with the disease of old buildings in New York. He was not a big man, but he was sturdily built, his muscles developed by the hard work he had done in the country. He was vain of his muscles, the breadth and strength of his hands, the smoothness of his skin, but he saw through this too, and he feared being caught in the part of that aging, conceited, handsome man. Old fool, he called himself, glancing away from the small mirror, the graying hair, the wrinkles of amusement and bitterness. Through the slats of the blind, he looked instead at the brown rocks of the park, speckled with mica, and at the optimistic leaping green of June. It would tire soon as leaves broadened and New York deposited its soot on the summer. It was, however, especially beautiful now, vivid in all particulars. The twigs, the small darts and subtly swelling shapes of green. Beauty is not a human invention. Dr. Emmerich, stooped but energetic, examined him, sounded his chest and back, flashed the light in his eyes, took his blood, felt his prostate gland, wired him for the electrocardiograph. Well, you are a healthy man. Not 21, but strong. Herzog heard this with satisfaction, of course, but still he was faintly unhappy about it. He had been hoping for some definite sickness, which would send him to a hospital for a while. He would not have to look after himself. His brothers, who had given up on him, more or less, would rally to him then, and his sister, Helen, might come to take care of him. The family would meet his expenses and pay for Marco in June. That was out now. Apart from the little infection he had caught in Poland, his health was sound, and even that infection was now cured, had been nonspecific. It might have been due to his mental state, to depression and fatigue, not to Wanda. For one horrible day he had thought it was gonorrhea. He must write to Wanda, he thought, as he pulled his shirt tails forward, buttoned his sleeve. Chère Wanda, he began. Bonnes nouvelles. Tien serai contente. It was another of his shady love affairs in French. For what other reason had he ground away at his Fraser and Squire in high school and read Rousseau and de Maistre in college? His achievements were not only scholarly, but sexual. And were those achievements? It was his pride that must be satisfied. His flesh got what was left over. Then what is the matter with you? Said Dr. Emmerich. An old man, hair grizzled like his own, face narrow and witty, looked up into his eyes. Herzog believed he understood his message. The doctor was telling him that in this decaying office he examined the truly weak, the desperately sick, stricken women, dying men. Then what did Herzog want with him? You seem very excited, Emmerich said. Yes, that's it. I am excited. Do you want Milltown? Snake root? Do you have insomnia? Not seriously, said Herzog. My thoughts are shooting out all over the place. Do you want me to recommend a psychiatrist? No, I've had all the psychiatry I can use. Then what about a holiday? Take a young lady to the country, the seashore. Do you still have a place in Massachusetts? If I want to reopen it. Does your friend still live up there? The radio announcer. What is the name of the big fellow with red hair with the wooden leg? Valentin Gersbach is his name. No, he moved to Chicago when we did. He's a very amusing man. Yes, very. I heard of your divorce. Who told me? I am sorry about it. Looking for happiness ought to be prepared for bad results. Emmerich put on his Ben Franklin eyeglasses and wrote a few words on the file card. The child is with Madeline in Chicago, I suppose, said the doctor. Yes. Herzog tried to get Emmerich to reveal his opinion of Madeline. She had been his patient, too. But Emmerich would say nothing. Of course not. A doctor must not discuss his patients. Still, an opinion might be construed out of the glances he gave Moses. She's a violent, hysterical woman, he told Emmerich. He saw from the old man's lips that he was about to answer, but then Emmerich decided to say nothing. And Moses, who had an odd habit of completing people's sentences for them, made a mental note about his own perplexing personality. A strange heart. I myself can't account for it. He now saw that he had come to Emmerich to accuse Madeline, or simply to talk about her with someone who knew her and could take a realistic view of her. But you must have other women, said Emmerich. Isn't there somebody? Do you have to eat dinner alone tonight? Herzog had Ramona. She was a lovely woman, but with her, too, there were problems, of course. There were bound to be problems. Ramona was a businesswoman. She owned a flower shop on Lexington Avenue. She was not young, probably in her 30s. She wouldn't tell Moses her exact age, but she was extremely attractive, slightly foreign, well-educated. When she inherited the business, she was getting her M.A. at Columbia in art history. In fact, she was enrolled in Herzog's evening course. In principle, he opposed affairs with students, even with students like Ramona Donzel, who were obviously made for them. Doing all the things a wild man does, he noted, while remaining all the while an earnest person, in frightful earnest. Of course, it was just this earnestness that attracted Ramona. Ideas excited her. She loved to talk. She was an excellent cook, too, and knew how to prepare shrimp arnaud, which she served with pouilly foessy. Herzog had supper with her several nights a week. In the cab passing from the drab lecture hall to Ramona's large West Side apartment, she had said she wanted him to feel how her heart was beating. He reached for her wrist to take her pulse, but she said, "We're not young children, Professor," and put his hand elsewhere. Within a few days, Ramona was saying that this was no ordinary affair. She recognized, she said, that Moses was in a peculiar state, but there was something about him so dear, so loving, so healthy, and basically so steady, as if, having survived so many horrors, he had been purged of neurotic nonsense, that perhaps it had been simply a question of the right woman all along. Her interest in him quickly became serious, and he consequently began to worry about her, to brood. He said to her a few days after his visit to Emmerich that the doctor had advised him to take a holiday. Ramona then said, "Of course you need a holiday. Why don't you go to Montauk? I have a house there. I could come out weekends. Perhaps we could stay together all of July." "I didn't know you owned a house," said Herzog. "It was up for sale a few years ago, and it was really too big for me alone. But I had just divorced Harold, and I needed a diversion." She showed him colored slides of the cottage. With his eye to the viewer, he said, "It's very pretty, all those flowers." But he felt heavy-hearted, dreadful. "One can have a marvelous time there, and you really ought to get some cheerful summer clothes. Why do you wear such drab things? You still have a youthful figure." "I lost weight last winter, in Poland and Italy." "Nonsense! Why talk like that? You know you're a good-looking man, and you even take pride in being one." In Argentina, they'd call you macho, masculine. You like to come on meek and tame and cover up the devil that's in you. Why put that little devil down? Why not make friends with him? Well, why not? Instead of answering, he wrote mentally, Dear Ramona, very dear Ramona, I love you very much, dear to me, a true friend. It might even go farther. But why is it that I, a lecturer, can't bear to be lectured? I think your wisdom gets me, because you have the complete wisdom, perhaps to excess. I do not like to refuse correction. I have a lot to be corrected about, almost everything, and I know good luck when I see it. This was the literal truth, every word of it. He did like Ramona. She came from Buenos Aires. Her background was international. Spanish, French, Russian, Polish, and Jewish. She had gone to school in Switzerland and still spoke with a slight accent, full of charm. She was short, but had a full, substantial figure, a good round seat, firm breast. All these things mattered to Herzog. He might think himself a moralist, but the shape of a woman's breast mattered greatly. Ramona was unsure of her chin, but had confidence in her lovely throat, and so she held her head fairly high. She walked with great efficiency, wrapping her heels in energetic Castilian style. Herzog was intoxicated by this clatter. She entered a room provocatively, swaggering slightly, one hand touching her thigh as though she carried a knife in her garter belt. It seemed to be the fashion in Madrid, and it delighted Ramona to come on playfully in the role of a tough Spanish broad, una navaja en la liga. She taught him the expression. She thought often of that imaginary knife when he watched her in her underthings, which were extravagant and black, a strapless contrivance called the Merry Widow, that drew in the waist and trailed red ribbons below. Her thighs were short but deep and white. The skin darkened where it was compressed by the elastic garment, and silky tags hung down the garter buckles. Her eyes were brown, sensitive and shrewd, erotic and calculating. She knew what she was up to. The warm odor, the downy arms, the fine bust, and excellent white teeth and slightly bowed legs, they all worked. Moses, suffering, suffered in style. His luck never entirely deserted him. Perhaps he was luckier than he knew. Ramona tried to tell him so. That bitch did you a favor, she said. You'll be far better off. Moses, he wrote, winning as he weeps, weeping as he wins, evidently can't believe in victories. Hitch your agony to a star. But at the silent moment at which he faced Ramona, he wrote incapable of replying except by mental letter. You are a great comfort to me. We are dealing with elements more or less stable, more or less controllable, more or less mad. It's true. I have a wild spirit in me, though. I look meek and mild. You think that sexual pleasure is all this spirit wants? And since we are giving him that sexual pleasure, then why shouldn't everything be well? Then he realized suddenly that Ramona had made herself into a sort of sexual professional or priestess. He was used to dealing with vile amateurs lately. I didn't know that I could make out with a true sack artist. But is that the secret goal of my vague pilgrimage? Do I see myself to be after long blundering an unrecognized son of Sodom and Dionysius? An Orphic type? Ramona enjoyed speaking of Orphic types. A petite bourgeois Dionysian. He noted, Foo to all these categories. Perhaps I will buy some summer clothes, he answered Ramona. I do like fine apparel, he went on. I used to rub my patent leather shoes with butter in early childhood. I overheard my Russian mother calling me Krasovitz, and when I became a gloomy young student with a soft, handsome face, wasting my time in arrogant looks. I thought a great deal about trousers and shirts. It was only later, as an academic, that I became dowdy. I bought a gaudy vest in the Burlington Arcade last winter and a pair of Swiss boots of the type I see now the village fairies have adopted. Heartsore? Yes. He further wrote, and dressed up, too. But my vanity will no longer give me much mileage, and to tell you the truth, I'm not even greatly impressed with my own tortured heart. It begins to seem another waste of time. Soberly deliberating, Herzog decided it would be better not to accept Ramona's offer. She was 37 or 38 years of age, he shrewdly reckoned, and this meant that she was looking for a husband. This in itself was not wicked or even funny. Simple and general human conditions prevailed among the most seemingly sophisticated. Ramona had not learned those erotic monkey shines in a manual, but in adventure, in confusion, and at times probably with a sinking heart in brutal and often alien embraces. So now she must yearn for stability. She wanted to give her heart once and for all, and level with a good man, become Herzog's wife and quit being an easy lay. She often had a sober look. Her eyes touched him deeply. Never idle, his mind's eye saw Montauk, white beaches, flashing light, glossy beakers, horseshoe crabs perishing in their armor, sea robins, and blowfish. Herzog longed to lie down in his bathing trunks and warm his troubled belly on the sand. But how could he? To accept too many favors from Ramona was dangerous. He might have to pay with his freedom. Of course, he didn't need that freedom now. He needed a rest. Still, after resting, he might want his freedom again. He wasn't sure of that either, but it was a possibility. A holiday will give me more strength to bring my neurotic life. Still, Herzog considered. He did look terrible. Caved in, he was losing more hair, and this rapid deterioration he considered to be a surrender to Madeline and Gersbach, her lover, and to all his enemies. He had more enemies and hatreds than anyone could easily guess from his thoughtful expression. The night school term was coming to an end, and Herzog convinced himself that his wisest move was to get away from Ramona too. He decided to go to the vineyard, but thinking it a bad thing to be entirely alone, he sent a night letter to a woman in Vineyard Haven, an old friend. They had once considered having an affair, but this had never materialized, and they were instead tenderly considerate of each other. In the wire, he explained the situation, and his friend, Libby Vane Eriksson Sisler, she had just married for the third time, and the house in the Haven belonged to her husband, an industrial chemist, telephoned him promptly and very emotionally and sincerely invited him to come and stay as long as he liked. "Rent me a room near the beach," Herzog requested. "Come and stay with us." No, I can't do that." "Well, you've just gotten married." "Oh, Moses, please don't be so romantic. Sisler and I have been living together 3 years." "Still, it is a honeymoon, isn't it?" "Oh, stop this nonsense. I'll be hurt if you don't stay here. We have 6 bedrooms. You come right out. I've heard what a rough time you've been having." In the end, it was inevitable. He accepted. He felt, however, that he was acting badly. By wiring, he had practically forced her to invite him. He had helped Libby greatly about 10 years before, and he would have been more pleased with himself if he had not made her pay off. He knew better than to ask for help. He was making a bore of himself, doing the weak thing, the corrupt thing. But at least, he thought, I don't have to make matters worse. I won't bore Libby with my troubles, or spend the week crying on her bosom. I'll take them out to dinner, her and her new husband. You have to fight for your life. That's the chief condition on which you hold it. Then why be half-hearted? Ramona is right. Get some light clothes. You can borrow more dough from Brother Shura. He likes that, and he knows you'll repay. That's living by the appropriative principle. You pay your debts. Therefore, he went shopping for clothes. He examined the ads in the New Yorker and Esquire. These now showed older men with lined faces as well as young executives and athletes. Then, after shaving more closely than usual and brushing his hair, could he bear to see himself in the brilliant triple mirrors of a clothing store? He took the bus uptown. Starting at 59th Street, he worked his way down Madison Avenue into the 40s and back toward the plaza on 5th. Then the gray clouds opened before the piercing sun. The windows glittered, and Herzog looked into them, shamefaced and excited. The new styles seemed to him reckless and gaudy. Madras coats, shorts with melting burst of Kandinsky colors, in which middle-aged or paunchy old men would be ludicrous. Better Puritan restraint than the exhibition of pitiful puckered knees and varicose veins, pelican bellies, and the indecency of haggard faces under sporty caps. Undoubtedly, Valentine Gersbach, who had beat him out with Madeleine, surmounting the handicap of a wooden leg, could wear those handsome brilliant candy stripes. Valentine was a dandy. He had a thick face and heavy jaws. Moses thought he somewhat resembled Putzi Han Festengel, Hitler's own pianist. But Gersbach had a pair of extraordinary eyes for a red-haired man. Brown, deep, hot eyes, full of life. The lashes, too, were vital, ruddy dark, long and childlike. And that hair was bearishly thick. Valentine, furthermore, was exquisitely confident of his appearance. You could see it. He knew he was a terribly handsome man. He expected women, all women, to be mad about him. And many were, weren't they? Including the second Mrs. Herzog. Wear that? Me? Said Herzog to the salesman in a Fifth Avenue shop. But he bought a coat of crimson and white stripes. Then he said over his shoulder to the salesman that in the old country his family had worn black gabardines down to the ground. From a youthful case of acne, the salesman had a rough skin. His face was red as a carnation, and he had a meat-flavored breath, a dog's breath. He was a trifle rude to Moses, for when he asked his waist size and Moses answered 34, the salesman said, "Don't boast." That had slipped out, and Moses was too gentlemanly to hold it against him. His heart worked somewhat with the painful satisfaction of restraint. Eyes lowered, he trod the gray carpet to the fitting room, and there, disrobing and working the new pants up over his shoes, he wrote the fellow a note. Dear Mac, dealing with poor jerks every day, male pride, effrontery, conceit, yourself obliged to be agreeable and winsome. Hard job if you happen to be a grudging, angry fellow. The candor of people in New York. Bless you, you are not nice, but in a false situation, as we all are, must manage some civility. A true situation might well prove unendurable to us all. From civility, I now have some pain in my belly. As for gabardines, I realize there are plenty of beards and gabardines just around the corner in the Diamond District. Oh, Lord, he concluded, forgive all these trespasses. Lead me not into Penn Station. Dressed in Italian pants, furled at the bottom, and a blazer with slender lapels, red and white, he avoided full exposure in the triple-lighted mirror. His body seemed unaffected by his troubles, survived all blasts. It was his face that was devastated, especially about the eyes, so that it made him pale to see himself. Preoccupied, the salesman among silent clothes racks did not hear Herzog's footfalls. He was brooding. Slow business. Another small recession. Only Moses was spending today. Money he intended to borrow from his money-making brother. Shura was not tight-fisted, nor was Brother Willie, for that matter. But Moses found it easier to take it from Shura, also something of a sinner, than from Willie, who was more respectable. The back fit all right, Herzog turned. Like tailor-made, the salesman said. He couldn't have cared less. It was perfectly plain. I can't get his interest, Herzog recognized. Then I'll do without, and screw him too. I'll decide for myself. It's my move. Thus strengthened, he stepped between the mirrors, looking only at the coat. It was satisfactory. Wrap it up, he said. I'll take the pants too, but I want them today, now. Can't do it. The tailor's busy. Today or it's no dice, said Herzog. I have to leave town. Two can play this hard-nosed game. I'll see if I can get a rush on it, the salesman said. He went and Herzog undid the chaste buttons. They had used the head of some Roman emperor to adorn the jacket of a pleasure-seeker, he noted. Alone, he put his tongue out at himself, and then withdrew from the triple mirror. He remembered how much pleasure it gave Madeline to try on clothes in shops, and how much heart and pride there was in her when she looked at herself, touching, adjusting, her face glowing, but severe too, with the great blue eyes, the vivid bangs, the medallion profile. The satisfaction she took in herself was positively plural, imperial. And she had told Moses during one of their crises that she had had a new look at herself nude before the bathroom mirror. Still young, she said, taking inventory. Young, beautiful, full of life. Why should I waste it all on you? Why, God forbid? Herzog looked for something to write a note with. Having left paper and pencil in the dressing room, he jotted on the back of the salesman's pad. A bitch in time breeds contempt. Looking through piles of beachwear, now silently laughing at himself as if his heart were swimming upward, Herzog bought a pair of trunks for the vineyard. And then a rack of old-fashioned straw hats caught his attention, and he decided to have one of those too. And was he getting all these things, he asked, because old Emmerich had prescribed a rest? Or was he preparing for a new shenanigans? Did he anticipate another entanglement at the vineyard? With whom? How should he know with whom? Women were plentiful everywhere. At home, he tried on his purchases. The bathing trunks were a little tight, but the oval straw hat pleased him, floating on the hair, which still grew thickly at the sides. In it, he looked like his father's cousin, Elias Herzog, the flour salesman who had covered the northern Indiana territory for General Mills back in the 20s. Elias, with his earnest, Americanized, clean-shaven face, ate hard-boiled eggs and drank prohibition beer. Home-brewed polished piva. He gave the eggs a neat rap on the rail of the porch and peeled them scrupulously. He wore colorful sleeve garters, and a skimmer, like this one, set on this same head of hair, shared also by his father, Rabbi Sandor Alexander Herzog, who wore a beautiful beard as well, a radiant, broad-strung beard that hid the outline of his chin and also the velvet collar of his frock coat. Herzog's mother had had a weakness for Jews with handsome beards. In her family, too, all the elders had beards that were thick and rich, full of religion. She wanted Moses to become a rabbi, and he seemed to himself gruesomely unlike a rabbi, now in the trunks and straw hat, his face charged with heavy sadness, foolish, utter longing of which a religious life might have purged him. That mouth, heavy with desire and irreconcilable anger, the straight nose, sometimes grim, the dark eyes, and his figure, the long veins winding in the arms and filling in the hanging hands, an ancient system of greater antiquity than the Jews themselves. The flat-topped hat, a crust of straw, had a red and white band matching the coat. He removed the tissue paper from the sleeves and put it on, swelling out the stripes. Bare-legged, he looked like a Hindu. Consider the lilies of the field, he remembered. They toil not, neither do they spin, yet Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed. He had been 8 years old in the children's ward of the Royal Victoria Hospital, Montreal. When he learned those words, a Christian lady came once a week and had him read aloud from the Bible. He read, "Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down and shaken together, and running over, shall men give unto your bosom." From the hospital roof hung icicles like the teeth of fish, clear drops burning at their tips. Beside his bed, the Goyish lady sat in her long skirts and buttoned shoes. The hatpin projected from the back of her head like a trolley rod. A paste odor came from her clothing, and then she had him read, "Suffer the little children to come unto me." She seemed to him a good woman. Her face, however, was strained and grim. "Where do you live, little boy?" "On Napoleon Street, where the Jews live." "What does your father do?" "My father is a bootlegger. He has a still in Point St. Charles. The spotters are after him. He has no money." Only, of course, Moses would never have told her any of this. Even at 5, he would have known better. His mother had instructed him, "You must never say." There was a certain wisdom in it, he thought, as if by staggering he could recover his balance, or by admitting a bit of madness come to his senses. And he enjoyed a joke on himself. Now, for instance, he had packed the summer clothes he couldn't afford and was making his getaway from Ramona. He knew how things would turn out if he went to Montauk with her. She would lead him like a tame bear in East Hampton, from cocktail party to cocktail party. He could imagine that Ramona laughing, talking, her shoulders bare in one of her pleasant blouses. They were marvelous feminine shoulders, he had to admit that. Her hair in black curls, her face, her mouth painted. He could smell the perfume. In the depths of man's being there was something that responded with a quack to such perfume. Quack! A sexual reflex that had nothing to do with age or subtlety, wisdom, experience, history, Wissenschaft, Bildung, Wahrheit. In sickness or health, there came the old quack quack at the fragrance of perfumed feminine skin. Yes, Ramona would lead him in his new pants and striped jacket, sipping a martini. Martinis were poison to Herzog, and he couldn't bear small talk. And so he would suck in his billy and stand on aching feet. He, the captive professor, she, the mature, successful, laughing, sexual woman. Quack, quack. His bag was packed, and she locked the window. His bag was packed, and he locked the windows and pulled the shades. He knew the apartment would smell mustier than ever when he came back from his bachelor holiday. 2 marriages, 2 children, and he was setting off a week of carefree rest. It was painful to his instincts, his Jewish family feelings, that his children should be growing up without him. But what could he do about that? To the sea. To the sea. What sea? It was the bay between East Chop and West Chop. It wasn't sea. The water was quiet. He went out, fighting his sadness over this solitary life. His chest expanded, and he caught his breath. "For Christ's sake, don't cry, you idiot. Live or die, but don't poison everything." Why this door should need a police lock he didn't know. Crime was on the increase, but he had nothing worth stealing. Only some excited kid might think he had, and lie in wait, hopped up to hit him on the head. Herzog led the metal foot of the lock into its slot in the floor and turned the key. He then checked to be sure he hadn't forgotten his glasses. No, they were in his breast pocket. He had his pens, notebook, checkbook, a piece of kitchen towel he had torn off for his handkerchief, and a plastic container of Forendantin tablets. The tablets were for the infection he had caught in Poland. He was cured of it now, but he took an occasional pill just to be on the safe side. That was a frightening moment in Krakow, in the hotel room, when the symptom appeared. He thought, "The clap at last, after all these years, at my time of life." His heart sank. He went to a British doctor, who scolded him sharply. "What have you been up to? Are you married?" "No." "Well, it isn't the clap. Pull up your trousers. You'll want a shot of penicillin, I suppose. All Americans do. Well, I shan't give it. Take this sulfa. No booze, mind you. Drink tea." They are unforgiving about sexual offenses. The fellow was angry, biting, a snotty, limey doctor. And I so vulnerable, heavy with guilt. I should have known that a woman like Wanda would not infect me with gonorrhea. She is sincere, loyal, devout towards the body, the flesh. She has the religion of civilized people, which is pleasure, creative and polymorphous pleasure. Her skin is subtle, white, silken, animate. "Dear Wanda," wrote Herzog. But she knew no English, and he changed to French. "Chère princesse, je me souviens et c'est souvent. Je pense là, Mars Zakowska, au brouillard." Every third, fourth, 10th-rate man of the world knew how to woo a woman in French, and so did Herzog, though he was not the type. The feelings he wanted to express were genuine. She had been extremely kind to him when he was ill, troubled, and what made her kindness even more significant was the radiant, buxom Polish beauty of the woman. She had weighty, golden reddish hair and a slightly tilted nose, but with very fine lines, the tip amazingly delicate and sharp, shapely for such a fleshy person. Her color was white, but a healthy, strong white. She was dressed like most women in Warsaw, in black stockings and long, slender Italian shoes, but her fur coat was worn to the hide. "In my grief, did I know what I was doing?" noted Herzog on a separate page as he waited for the elevator. "Providence," he added, "takes care of the faithful. I sensed that I would meet such a person. I have had terrific luck." Luck was many times underscored. Herzog had seen her husband. He was a poor, reproachful-looking man with heart disease. The sole fault Herzog had found with Wanda was that she insisted he meet Zygmunt. Moses had not yet grasped what this meant. Wanda rejected the suggestion of divorce. She was perfectly satisfied with her marriage. She said it was all any marriage could be. "Ici tout est caché. Un dizaine de jours et vous savez, pas longtemps." If you could call those foggy winter intervals days. The sun was shut up in a cold bottle. The soul shut up inside me. Enormous felt curtains kept the drafts out of the hotel lobby. The wooden tables were stained, warped, tea scalded. Her skin was white, and remained white through every change of emotion. Her greenish eyes seemed let into her Polish face. Nature, the seamstress, a full, soft bosom woman. She was too heavy for the stylish, tapering Italian shoes she wore. Standing without the heels in her black hose, her figure was very solid indeed. He missed her. When he took her hand, she said, "Ah, ne touchez pas, c'est dangereux." But she didn't mean it at all. How he doted on his memories. What a funny, sensual bird he was. Queer for recollections, perhaps. But why use harsh words? He was what he was. Still, he had been continually aware of drab Poland, in all directions freezing drab and ruddy gray, the stones still smelling of wartime murders. He thought he scented blood. He went many times to visit the ruins of the ghetto. Wanda was his guide. He shook his head. But what could he do? He pressed the elevator button again, this time with the corner of his Gladstone bag. He heard the sound of smooth motion in the shaft, greased tracks, power, efficient, black machinery. Gure de cette petite maladie. He ought not to have mentioned it to Wanda, for she was simply shocked and hurt. Pas grave de tout, he wrote. He had made her cry. The elevator stopped, and he ended, "J'embrasse ces petites, mon ami." How do you say blonde little cushion knuckles in French?